Welcome to the lighter side of the spectrum, the podcast that celebrates the multiple hats we wear and the juggling acts we perform in life. Whether you're parenting kids and teens on the autism spectrum, navigating the ever-evolving healthcare industry, or building a more inclusive and impactful world, this is your space to find connection, inspiration, and growth. Together, we'll share stories, tackle challenges, and explore how innovation and inclusion create better outcomes for everyone. Because no matter the spectrum, there's always a lighter side. Now here's your host, David Coffer.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the lighter side of the spectrum. Today's conversation is one I think a lot of people are going to relate to, maybe more than they expect, because we're not just talking about autism today. We're talking about identity. We're talking about understanding ourselves and about those moments where something clicks and you start to see your life through a completely different lens. Our guest today is Dr. Claire Jack, a psychologist, writer, and host of the Autistic Minds podcast. Joining us from across the pond, Claire focuses on helping people understand neurodivergence in a way that feels human, accessible, and honestly a little less underwhelming. We're going to be talking about things like masking, burnout, late diagnoses in a way that feels real and relatable, not clinical or heavy. With all that, Claire, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. As we were talking ahead of time, you've done a lot of incredible writing, covered a lot of ground with your articles, and I know that you're very involved in this space. But for our audience meeting you for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about how you found your way into this work?
Yeah, I suppose autism was something that I'd never thought about earlier in life at all. And when I was in my late 40s, so a few years ago now, I went to a therapist who actually suggested autism to me. And I think, like a lot of autistic people, it was a bit of a catalyst to doing lots of research, to finding out more, to just delving into autism. I'm a therapist and started to be contacted by people who are interested in working with me. And that was really how my work around autism started. I started to do a lot of blogging, researching, writing books, and that's where it all stemmed from.
I think that's really fascinating because you mentioned, on your own website about how you really didn't know a lot about autism before this moment, right? I mean, so can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I knew absolutely nothing about autism. I think it would be fair to say. And just to sort of give a little bit more context,
Yeah.
I had, I would say, quite a severe meltdown. As a therapist, I have therapy myself, but the usual therapist that I saw wasn't able to see me. And I felt it was a bit of an emergency situation. So I saw somebody new. And I was really just talking around the circumstances of the meltdown. And there was some really specific things in here, like getting very upset about my mum had moved to live near me, and just finding it really difficult dealing with the change, dealing with all the practical aspects of that, dealing with some very specific things around the space being different. And this therapist picked up on a lot of different things and suggested autism to me. So up to that point, it's something that had never crossed my mind in any level. I hadn't really come into contact with any clients that I knew were autistic. I wasn't aware of anyone in my family or anything. I mean, with hindsight, yes, there's definitely...
With hindsight, yeah. Right. That's funny.
Yeah. But it was just completely new to me. It was like a whole new world opened up at that point.
It makes a lot of sense in many ways that there wasn't a diagnosis for because there probably weren't quote unquote obvious signs. And we're kind of a similar generation, and I think back then I think it was more apt to describe kids who were growing up who probably, on the spectrum as being quirky, right? Or sensitive, or I don't know. There were probably other labels that were used and just never any deeper dive into that. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I would, but I do. I always knew that my mum had contacted a psychologist when I was very small. So when I was about 2, and I remember sort of very, very vividly, it's a very early memory. I would go into the garden and I would talk to my sister up a tree. She wasn't there, she was at boarding school, but I think I missed her so much. And I was just really caught up in this imaginary world, which was really, really intense. And I know that my mum had worried about me at that point and had taken me to a psychologist who just said I had an overactive imagination. So I guess that was one unusual trait that just wasn't explored. And I think apart from that, nobody ever would have seen any problems. So I guess I just showed up as a really painfully shy, quiet kid with dreadful migraines. And again, my mum
Oh,
took me to the doctor. They almost didn't believe because they started the minute I went to school. So it was obviously some kind of psychosomatic
yeah,
response.
right.
But they almost thought I was too young to have migraines like that. And I think the other big thing that, like, my sensory stuff is quite off the scale at times. And my family just adapted around it. In some ways they were very good probably about it. I wouldn't sit in a room with an open door. I wouldn't sit with people who were using certain plates. I wouldn't touch bananas or grapes. I used to have to get people to peel bananas for me. But I
Yeah.
think they just sort of knew that was me. I was also
That was just you. That was,
I was
yeah.
very bossy. I was kind of I used to do a little list for people to do what I wanted them to do around the dinner table. And I think people
That's
would
funny.
humoured me a bit. So all the signs were there. But yeah, it was just accommodated. And I think the sort of difficulty for me was the huge shyness. That was the really bad bit, and the panic and the worry.
Mm.
Yeah, it was just that highly sensitive, shy kind of label that was
I think it's interesting that you have the shyness, but then the bossiness that went with that too. Like, I don't necessarily tie those two together because a lot of
only
times,
at home, not
only
at
at home.
school.
Oh,
It was
gotcha. Okay.
just
You
at
knew,
home.
you
Yeah.
knew, you knew the environment.
Absolutely.
You've talked also about just how life-changing the diagnosis has been for you. And I'm really interested in that because I haven't dove into the aspect of adult autism. My life has been raising an autistic child and obviously being immersed in that. But I'm really fascinated by what we've been seeing, obviously, the last 5 or 10 years, right? This whole wave of adults who either were diagnosed and now are coming of age, but especially those who, as that population that you're helping now, get diagnosed and then come to terms with it. What does this mean? What did it mean for you first?
I mean, initially, I guess I was quite excited when the therapist mentioned, well, actually, initially I was a bit shocked, and I just because I didn't know about autism, and I thought, no, that can't be me. But then once I started to think there were some answers, I found it really, really exciting, and everything just seemed to fit. And I guess what it gave me was answers. So it explained things. It just, I've always been one of these people that can get by. I've always managed. I've always been okay. But it just explained why things were really difficult. And I think that was the biggest thing. It's instead of just thinking, why is this hard, and being really self-judgmental and self-critical, you suddenly go, oh, right, this is why it's hard. And I think that was the sort of initial thing. But I think it's been quite a while for me now. So I guess there have been phases. And
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, because I think a lot of the people I work with it's at that really early stage, or it's if I'm doing an assessment with them and they're so immersed in it and it's awareness. And that can feel a little bit overwhelming too. I guess everything becomes about autism. But I think where I am now is just I will do things that I wouldn't have done before because, I know that they're more difficult for me, but that kind of gives me the confidence just to go, I'll go out and do it, even if it's harder. So for a while, there was a lot of pulling back from stuff and just looking after myself. And then I think you kind of replenish. You're like, okay, I'm ready to get out there. But I'll do it on my terms is the biggest thing.
That's great. I mean, it almost like it's kind of giving you an opportunity to kind of reframe things and, as you approach them, whereas maybe before there was more hesitation and maybe even kind of a sense of confusion of like, why am I hesitating? But now you're like, again, I'm just saying this, but maybe it's like, okay, now I know I'm autistic. I know this is hard, but I'm going to do it. Now I know because of, like it kind of gives you that baseline. It sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also that sense of, I know I'm autistic and I'm not going to do it as well.
Right.
Just go,
Yeah.
I'm not doing this. It's not my thing. I've only got so much energy, so I'm really going to pick and choose what I do want to do.
I'm curious now. Again, people obviously approach you. You've been working with adults, getting the diagnosis. What are some of the things that they're seeing in themselves? What are some of the things that drive people to say, maybe I should look into this? What are some things?
I think often people have quite a long history of mental health issues. So
okay, yeah.
Anxiety, depression, they've really tried a lot of different things. They've had therapy, medication, maybe other diagnoses, but they've just got this long, long history that they haven't got answers for. So I would say that that's a big thing. I think by the time, particularly the client base that I work with most of the time, who are sort of middle-aged women,
Okay,
they're
right.
just really exhausted. They've been pushing through, they've been doing things. They are often just really fatigued and tired and almost get to a stage, this is too difficult to keep doing.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, I guess there's so much more awareness now. So it might be people just thinking, I've always had different sensory issues. I've always really felt terribly uncomfortable socially. A lot of people, I think when they're younger, they maybe keep trying to make friends, but there's maybe a history of problems in those friendships. So getting to an age and just thinking, why do my relationships not work out? Why do I struggle to make friends? Quite a lot of people are lonely. So lots of different angles, but a general sense that things are quite difficult, that they're just not really working out for me.
Yeah, interesting. And I could see where that would be the case. And I love the fact, I thought that's really interesting, as you mentioned, that you focus on women primarily.
Yeah.
Not exclusively, but primarily, right?
Yeah.
Traditionally, obviously, an underrepresented population when you talk about autism as well. And,
Yeah.
can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, there's an awful lot of research to show that socially girls are often a bit more primed to try and make social connections.
Right.
I suppose things like anger and things, it's often a bit more unacceptable with girls, perhaps. Maybe this bossy behavior that I've mentioned earlier. It's
right.
sort of seen differently. And I think things like girls' interests as well, it's often focused on other people or pop bands or animals. So the girls will have the same traits, but they just don't show up in as obvious a way as the boys. And I think for a lot of children particularly, if kids are not sort of creating any problems at school or anything, they often just slip under the net. They just,
Yeah.
they're fine. They're just kind of left to get on with it. And for a long time, there was a sort of long-standing idea that autism was pretty much only associated with boys. So the research was supporting that, practitioners not seeing autism in girls. So I think those are the primary reasons why it would tend to be missed in girls.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that you're still seeing that even again among kids today. Now we know that the diagnosis is higher. I mean, that's just a fact, right? That is, when you look at the population, there are a lot more boys being diagnosed than girls, but girls are diagnosed, and I think that, like you were saying, they kind of fall through the cracks in a lot of ways, or just kind of not addressed in the same ways that boys are. For whatever reason, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah. I would also say, though, I've got two sons, and my younger son, 16, I sort of realised when he was about 12 that he was autistic. It took me a little while. It was mainly through my own experience.
Right.
And he was one of these kids, I went, well, he's just like me. And then the penny dropped, and I thought, all right, that's
he's just like me.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a really quiet, sensitive kid. Again, there's no issues at school or anything. He does really well on his schoolwork. And when I mentioned this to the teachers, they would never have thought about it. So I think, although we think of things like camouflaging with girls and women, it's absolutely a part of boys and men's experience in some cases as well. And that, I think, probably hasn't received much attention. But I know, from his experience, he is a really high masker, incredibly high, as much as any of my female clients that I might see.
That is a perfect segue, because that was actually the next thing I wanted to talk about with you was masking. It's a word that's coming up, I think, more and more. But I'm not sure that people really understand what it means. Or they may, again, they may think it means one thing and means another. Can you explain it kind of in everyday terms, how you explain it?
I'll try, because to be honest, I sometimes find it's more complicated, I think, than initially people think. So I suppose when I first started hearing about masking or camouflaging, I was very much thinking about things like social anxiety and trying to hide the level of anxiety that you were experiencing and, put on an act, maybe not let people see how distressed you were. That is absolutely a part of masking, but it goes an awful lot deeper. So I think one of the big things about masking is things like masking repetitive behaviors or stimming.
Oh,
So
interesting.
That's something that I very much do. And I was actually thinking about this just ahead of this call the other day, because I remember being 5 and I was a thumb sucker, which is a sort of form of stimming.
Yeah.
And I remember going to school and being really horrified, this is at 5 years old, that there were a couple of children in the class sucking their thumbs. I thought I would never do that in public. So even at that age,
the awareness,
I was certain masking. I was just like, I wouldn't do that. And I was thinking about other stimming behaviors. One of mine is listening to music on repeat again and again and again and again. I've always done this. My children are really the only people that I've ever seen this, because I tend to do it in the car. And I'll maybe just have 2 songs that I have to play, because I don't like driving, so I have to play them over.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah.
And, it's something that even now, with all my knowledge, my partner knows that I do this because I've told him. But if he comes into the room and I'm on, number 50, playing the same song, I still feel really embarrassed about it. Like, I turn it off, because even though he knows I don't want him to hear me. So it's so deep rooted. So I think that kind of hiding certain behaviors is a huge thing. And the other thing, which is probably a bit less for me, but certainly for some of my clients, is in terms of really having made an effort to learn certain language styles and perhaps phrases and sort of really rehearsing what they're going to say in advance. So they might come across as pretty fluent and being able to respond and everything, but that might have just taken a huge amount of energy. So I think the whole camouflaging thing almost means that somebody can hide their autistic traits, but they're really putting an awful lot of energy into it. So it's quite different from just being a bit socially anxious and trying to put on a bit of an act, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I'm just thinking about that as you're talking. I mean, it's complicated, isn't it? Because to a certain degree, you could say pretty much all humans mask.
Definitely.
Right. You know, like so you're kind of talking about different levels, different layers, different situations, you know, like, and maybe it's kind of the types of behaviors or types of things that you're masking too that may differ between, you know, again, someone who's autistic versus someone who's not necessarily diagnosed. I mean, to me, like I said, it just strikes me because you're talking about rehearsing before, you know, a social engagement, for example, or, you know, whatever. But like I said, I think most people can relate to that. You know, before a big meeting, like, you know, I've been a business owner, you're pitching the client, like you have that anxiety, right? Like, and so, you know, you gear up and then, you know, you open the door, you walk in, and all of a sudden, you know, you're like, okay, this is who I am, right? Like, in this situation, that's masking, but that's not necessarily, you know, that's not necessarily bad in that case.
No. And I think you're quite right. And I sort of always say to my clients, everybody masks, you know, and I'm not going to turn up here with my dressing gown on, sucking my thumb. It's, you know, this is my professional self. And we've all got a private and a professional self. But I think where the sort of difference is almost in the starting point. So if you're autistic, it's not just about sort of having a bit of a professional self or someone that your family might know or your friends might know. You're having to cover a lot more just to, you know, just to sort of get by. I mean, an example might be, let's say, because it would be definitely the experience of some of my clients, they might have been absolutely terrified before this podcast, much more than perhaps a usual level of anxiety. So, you know, somebody might have been up all night worrying about this and timings and everything else, but they have to sit here and just talk. So when you think about where they're starting from, they've got to put an awful lot more effort into it. And I think the other thing that for some people with masking, they put all this effort in and it still doesn't land right. So, you know, you can be, I've had that experience quite often. I've really thought that I'm putting a lot of effort in, say, around new people or a group situation. And then somebody will just say, you know, it's actually really rude, to be honest, but they'll say something, oh, you're really quiet. And it's like, do you know how much effort I'm actually putting in to just be around
here? Yeah, right.
Not let you see how bored I am. I'm actually showing up and trying
I'm quiet and you're boring. Yeah.
And, you know, or people, I remember being at a family thing once and my partner's grandmother had said something about, you know, are you really depressed to me?
Oh, jeez.
Really
wow.
not. But I just thought, oh God, I have to adjust my face now. So yeah, it's just, I think it's more that thing. It's not landing very well sometimes. Yeah. Plus it's taking a lot of effort. So the whole thing's a little bit exhausting.
It's interesting. So one of the areas I jump to, Claire, also is with ABA therapy, right? And it seems that a lot of that is really kind of directed towards masking, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, when I look back, as you know, I've talked about on this program, you know, we went through ABA therapy for a couple of years with our son because we were told that's what you had to do. Like, that's is the data driven, blah, blah, blah. And it was covered by insurance, whatever.
Yeah.
But again, looking back, so much of that is really seems to be really kind of driven towards masking, right? Like, it's really like, let's, you know, this is what you need to do to fit in or to, you know, not be seen as different or to, you know, fit into the society, you know, all that stuff. And I think as we're talking about this, it just kind of reinforces why there's been so much pushback against ABA, particularly again among the adults, right? The ones who went through it are now autistic adults and could talk about it, talk about what the experience was like and, you know, why it was in their mind so traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the sort of biggest things that I come across that I think is a really unpleasant experience is being sort of taught to make eye contact when that doesn't feel right for you. And, you know, so the research sort of shows that eye contact can be really painful for autistic people. And this idea of, you know, say pushing a child to make eye contact, it can affect their communication and so many other things. You know, they might not be able to verbally process something. They might be feeling really upset, really uncomfortable. And I know that's just one example of what somebody might be taught, but I do find that really problematic when it's something that just doesn't feel right at all.
And it's so pervasive. It's so pervasive that, you know, look, you know, make eye contact. Again, I think that's changing. I've seen, fortunately, with the awareness that's come along the last few years, like, hey, like you said, a lot of the kids simply can't process the same way that or also the awareness that they're processing a lot better when they're not looking at you or looking at things directly. Yeah, that's huge. You know, one of the articles you wrote about this kind of gets into masking and also kind of the adult diagnosis. But one of the things you talked about was, you know, why feeling different isn't always a sign of autism.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think when I'm doing assessments, quite a lot of the people that are coming to me, they've done their research, they've really looked into it. A high proportion are autistic. But I do have clients who have just always had this sense of difference, and they sometimes use that as a starting point.
Right.
But actually, they're not meeting the other criteria for autism. And I think there's just so many reasons that you might feel different. I think quite often, if you've maybe had a more disruptive or chaotic or abusive sort of family background, there's just going to be that sense that something isn't right. It could be that somebody's affected by, say, poverty, or for some reason there's a tension on them when they're growing up that might cause a sense of feeling different to other people in the neighborhoods or whatever is going on. So I think there's just an awful lot of environmental reasons why somebody feels different. So it's not always related to neurodivergence, but there can be a bit of a tendency to think that that's maybe the answer.
I'm glad that you addressed that, right? Because you have people who have used that framing, the self-diagnosis in particular, right? It's like, oh, I'm different. I'm, you know, XYZ. I'm just, you know, I'm autistic, you know, and that has rightfully, I think, offended a lot of the people who are truly not neurodivergent and understand, you know, the differences, that it's, you know, being autistic is more than just being quirky or being different.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot more, you know, you've really got various different criteria that you need to sort of fulfill. And I guess for some people, they're maybe more aware of the social communication side but they're actually not really aware of autism in a more detailed way. So it's really just that side. And I think for some people as well, they do have high levels of social anxiety. So again, possible to make a bit of a jump towards thinking, could this be autism? And it's a great starting point, but it's not always the right answer.
Right. All right. Well, that's another great segue, Claire. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and go into our weekly segments. We're going to start with our autism tip of the week. And we've got, as I mentioned to you before, we've got jingles for all these. I hope you enjoy them.
Parents gather around, it's time to speak. We're here with your tip of the week. Strategies and wisdom just for you. Autism parents, we know what you go through.
All right, it's time for our autism tip of the week, when we want to try to leave listeners and viewers with something that they can grasp onto, move forward. Claire, you're an expert in this field. You have a ton of experience. Do you have any tips of the week to share with our folks?
I was thinking about this. I think my sort of tip might be to try and recognize when you're feeling emotionally dysregulated. And if you can't prevent it, try and notice some of the earlier signs before you reach a complete sort of meltdown stage, if that makes sense. So I tend to think about emotional regulation as a timeline, right from the tiniest little signs that something isn't right up to potentially really melting down or having a complete shutdown. And I think for a lot of autistic people, things seem to happen really quickly. You get to that very heightened response stage, and you kind of feel that there's no build-up, or you don't recognize the build-up. So I think part of the reason it was just sort of fresh on my mind, I got a bit carried away with the new bit of technology last night. So I love my tech, and I just, was recording into it. I was playing with it. It was sort of great at the time. I spent way too long. So I woke up this morning just really tired because I played with it for too long, and just had that kind of emotional, teary feeling. And in the past, I was actually meeting a friend for coffee this morning. And in the past, I would have cancelled meeting her. I would have probably just started to feel worse throughout the day, partly because of cancelling. I would have been looking for reasons, but actually I could just go, I was working too late. I've sort of taught myself to recognise the signs. I knew that the teariness, the feeling of overwhelm, that's exactly what it was. But it's taken a lot of work to be able to recognise that. But once I could recognise it, once I could name it, then I was able to actually, it's fine. I'm just a bit tired. Went out, had a lovely coffee, had a walk, felt a lot better. That would have probably led to a much more intense situation in the past. So I know that was a bit long-winded, but I think
that's
working
great
on that emotional regulation and trying to recognise what your individual signs are, trying to catch them, trying to take some action before they do get to that higher level. But if they do get to the higher level, another good tip is trying not to feel bad about it. It's happened. You know, you've shouted, you've had a meltdown, you've had a strong response. If you start shaming yourself and feeling bad about it, you're just going to make it way worse. So it happened. It's a part of autism. Let's move on from it, I think is another good tip.
I think that's a great tip. And again, I think it's something that many of us can relate to, diagnosed or not, in terms of, I guarantee almost everyone listening, watching at some point has gone down that rabbit hole, right? And spent way too much time with technology or whatever it may be. It's easy to do for a lot of reasons. And like you said, then you have that I could just relate to everything you're saying. And it does tend to potentially kind of spiral. And then each step that you take can make it worse, right? Like you said, you cancel, then you start feeling bad about canceling. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. And that, now if only I'd done this better, I wouldn't have had to cancel. And then, right, you could really spiral. So I think what you had talked about, just kind of identifying it, accepting it, is really important. So I think that's a great tip. Thank you, Claire. All right, next up, we've got autism fact or fiction.
Get QuickTime ready, and here we go. This is Autism Fact or Fiction. We're breaking down what's real, what's rumor, and what might surprise you. Let's go.
All right. So do you have any autism fact or fiction? If not, I've got something I was going to pull from one of your articles to kind of tee up.
You go for it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Autism fact or fiction. Do autistic women experience menopause differently?
Yes. And I've just written another article on this.
Oh, okay.
Today. I think for a lot of autistic women, again, thinking about my client group, perimenopause is a time when they're often looking for answers. So that's actually what the latest blog is about. They are seeking answers. And I think a lot of this is because things that have always been sort of manageable suddenly feel unmanageable. So I think one of the biggest things that women might experience is different sensory types of experiences. So you think about menopause, there's sort of different moods, there's heightened responses to things, but for a lot of autistic women, it's almost like your nervous system is on fire and sensory stuff becomes really, really difficult. I think that's a big thing. Another thing is trying to communicate needs to medical practitioners. Can be incredibly difficult given the sort of social communication differences. So from a personal sort of experience, doctors have always been the worst thing for me. Going right back to childhood, I was really violent in doctor situations. I'm not violent anymore. I wouldn't but I cannot communicate with doctors. And I was actually speaking to someone recently, very similarly, just cannot communicate at all. I mean, I literally cannot talk to medical professionals. So I think when you need help of some kind of neuroautistic, that can be a really big issue for a lot of women round about menopause. For some women, the whole bodily experience, again, at a sensory level, is a lot more heightened than it is for most people. So things like hot flushes can be completely unbearable. And I think, everyone thinks, well, we're all women, we're all going through it. But actually, an autistic woman might be having a very different experience. So yeah, I think
it makes sense.
things.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it again. It's just an extension of your humanity, right? I mean, you experience other senses, and sensory experiences differently. Why would this be any different?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a great one. You're bringing it today, Claire. All right, the next one we're going to talk about, and like you said, that's we frame it as parent confession, but it could be any type of confession.
Yep.
So we'll go ahead and cue that up too. I might have one here.
Morning routines can go astray. Found socks in the fridge one day. Laughter's the best remedy. Hey, we're just finding our own way. Mom, dad, confessions every week. Sharing joys and moments we seek. Honest tales that make us unique. Join the club, we're never meek.
All right, so this is our time to show, again, our human side. When we confess to something that maybe we wish didn't happen, or looking back at and say, yeah, it happened.
Okay, I've got a sort of story that to be honest, I didn't understand until I understood autism. And actually, it was a while after I'd been diagnosed autistic that I understood what this meant in non-autistic sort of situations. So what it was, I was getting a train from where I lived to the next town, but they had a bus replacement on for the train. So it was really close. It was about 10 minutes away. And the bus replacement came to the rail station, got on the bus, went to the next town, did my shopping, and then got the bus replacement back to where I lived. So it drew up to the rail station, and I was expecting it to stop, and it didn't stop. I'm an adult at this time. I was sort of in my 30s.
Yeah.
I was just having an afternoon off before I went to collect my son from school. Anyway, so the bus didn't stop, but it wasn't going fast. It slowed down. It just hadn't stopped. So with hindsight, all I had to do was stand up and say, sorry, I need to get off here. But what actually happened was I got completely confused, and I just sat there thinking, why is the bus not stopping? And then the bus driver put on some kind of heavy rock music.
Oh.
And at that point, I decided that he'd hijacked us and he was kidnapping us. I don't know.
Wow.
I do know why. I absolutely knew why. And I thought that we were being hijacked and kidnapped. And I looked around in the bus and I thought, why are these people not looking as terrified?
Why are they so calm?
And then I thought maybe they're all just really scared and they don't want to say anything. And again, I never thought of asking somebody. That didn't come to mind. So I went all the way. I ended up going 30 miles to the next city, by which time I think I'd worked out he probably wasn't kidnapping us when he turned into the bus station. I had to get off that bus. And then I had to get on another bus, go all the way back home.
To go back home.
In time for the school run. Now, I couldn't believe that I had done this. I just thought, what a strange thing to do. And it wasn't until I read a book, which I completely can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Autism and the Predictive Mind, that it all made sense to me. So in that book, written by a psychologist, they sort of say that autistic people have much stronger predictions of how things should be, and that if things don't meet those predictions, that it can take much longer to make sense of it. And I genuinely think just because the bus didn't slow down, my brain could not make sense of that situation at all. And it just went to a completely...
I tried to make sense of it, and it right
to make sense, and I was like, "Well, we're being kidnapped."
right.
And looking back, I'm like, "What a daft thing to think." But I genuinely was scared, and I genuinely believed that in that moment, to the point that I did a 60-mile trip to get back home. So that
was it a nice drive at least?
No, because I thought we were being kidnapped until we nearly got there.
Oh, yeah, you weren't able to enjoy the scenery. No, but in all seriousness, it does make sense, right? In hindsight, the combination of probably, again, the sensory input, the fear.
Yeah, I think
all of
it.
it.
It really does. And, I think my younger son had something very similar. And it sort of made sense. I was working in the back room. He knew that I worked there. It was a glass door. He could have looked through, that this was a regular thing. And he was about 4. And he was in the middle of watching a movie, and he shouted "Mum" a couple of times. I didn't answer because I was on the phone. But I mean, I was there. I was in the house. I was in the room. I was always in. And in his head, he decided I'd abandoned him. And he left the house. He had no socks, no shoes. He was 4, so he wasn't that little. And he decided to go to his grandparents' house. They lived about 10 minutes away.
Oh, wow.
So he's just walking around the street with no socks, no shoes. Eventually, I realised that he was missing. I ran after I found him. And he just said, but you weren't there. I was like, but I was. Like, he didn't think of looking for me. He just
jumped to that conclusion.
And it was very similar to that bus thing. It was just a conclusion that was really wrong, but could have been a bit disastrous.
Absolutely.
Walking around the streets with no socks or shoes on. So.
Right. And the confusion. And, that's actually something that we faced a few times as well. Right. Our son Stone has never been like an eloper, fortunately. But there have been a few moments. There have been times, like you said, where he didn't know where I was, and just that fight or flight reflex just kicks in, and he's left, and I realize he's gone, or we've gotten a phone call from the next door. Like there's one time I was in the bathroom, literally, my wife was at work. She calls me. She's like, "Do you know where Stone is?" I'm like, "Yeah, he's in his room." She's like, "No, he's next door." Because he didn't know I was, and fortunately, again, they know, and all's well that ends well. But I think that's a lot more common than people realize.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's great. All right, so we're our last segment. This is a newer one, Claire. We just introduced. We're end things on the lighter side, right? Try to bring a little brightness in. So this one is light on the spectrum.
Light on the spectrum. A moment, person, or story, bringing something good. It feels hopeful, grounded, not performative. Use it for a person, a moment, a breakthrough, a story.
Do you have anything on the lighter side that you want to share to kind of wrap up this episode? I have something if you don't. No, I won't put the pressure on you.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, well, I'll go first. So again, talking about Stone, he had entered, we had found our local Center for the Arts, Eden Center for the Arts, was hosting a poetry slam contest. And we're like, he writes poetry. He's a great writer. And we're like, Stone, you should enter this contest. And long story short, you have to, the rules were you have to speak your poem, right, in front of a video camera, submit that and the poem together. Well, obviously, Stone is non-speaking, so he couldn't quite do that. But, we used text-to-talk software. He wrote it. We videotaped it on Zoom, right, so that way you could show that he typed it out, like did it all legit. And about a week and a half ago, he got a really polite letter basically saying, "Oh, sorry, you didn't make the cut, but we'll give you free tickets to the event if you want to come join us," which is a little condescending. Anyway, he didn't mope. He didn't, I said, "Hey, do you want to respond?" And he said, yes. So he wrote a letter to the woman who organized and said, "I thought I'd share it here because I thought it was just a really great way to handle it." And of course, I'm just incredibly proud. But he said, "Dear Diana, I'm disappointed that I wasn't selected to participate in the poetry slam contest. Can you please tell me if you actually watched the video of me typing out my poem with a voiceover? I've never been able to say the words that I write, so I have to depend on technology. Believe me, I would love nothing more than to stand on a stage and recite my poems. I thank my lucky stars that I am even able to communicate now after going so many years unable to do so. So I'm wondering if it was the poem itself. This is a poem I wrote specifically for the contest, and I thought it was quite good. I would appreciate it if you could tell me if there was something in the rules that I missed. Going forward, I'm always looking for feedback to improve my craft. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, Stone Coffer."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he sent that off last week, and we haven't gotten a response yet. So he went ahead and he actually wrote, after this letter, he wrote a blog post. He started his own Substack. So this is my shout out for everyone to subscribe to Stone's Substack. It's Stones Speaks with a Z on Substack. Search for it, subscribe. You'll see he has a couple of posts that he started writing there. So I just think that's, again, I just thought it was really cool.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing. And, it's so great that sort of using his voice to get out there and using technology in that way and everything. It really, really is inspiring.
Oh, well, it is. He inspires me every day. And like I said, just to be so articulate and so polite. Sometimes I'm like, "Honey, is he my kid?" So Claire, if anyone listening right now, they're just beginning their journey or looking into this, starting to question or explore, do you have any last tips?
I do assessments. I actually do assessments throughout the world, specialising working mainly with adult women, very sort of neurodivergent friendly assessments. I do coaching as well. And I think, if you're thinking about autism, that's often the point where you're looking for a lot of information. So I think sometimes people feel almost a little bit guilty or indulgent or something. Don't, if you're not autistic, that's fine. If you've got information, you can absolutely rule it out. But, if you are autistic, getting those answers makes a massive difference, just having that certainty. And I think just, it makes things an awful lot easier if you can put a name to it, if you have explanation. Yeah. And I think as well, we often think about moving forwards, but for the client group I work with, it's equally important that you understand your past so that you know why things were difficult as a kid. Looking back at my work history, I was going to say appalling, but that's judgmental. It was really short-lived. I had a sort of promising academic career in front of me that was really short-lived because I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I sort of couldn't ask my boss. I fumbled my way through. I wouldn't turn up to conferences. It was always like I'd have to make up a story and things. If I'd known I was autistic, that would have been really, really different. But looking back, I can just make my peace with it now because there is a reason. So I think, the looking back part is incredibly important for people as well.
That's a great point. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I'm glad that we connected, Claire. Thank you so much.
It's been lovely.
For joining me on this week's episode. Wealth of resources, information. Again, we'll post your website in the show notes for people who want to get a hold of you. So again, thank you out there for listening and joining us on this week. Until next week, we'll catch you again on the lighter side of the spectrum.